Welcome back to Into the Gray. Usually on this show, we talk about the heavy stuff, the split-second decisions, the dark corners of the human condition, and the burdens that come with carrying a badge. We talk about the thin line between right and wrong, and how easily it gets blurred. But this episode, we're going to take a detour. If you don't laugh in this line of work, you'll absolutely lose your mind. Ask any officer, deputy, or trooper about their wildest shift, and 9 times out of 10, the story involves someone who had a few too many. Alcohol and drugs don't just impair judgment. They seem to bend the very laws of physics and logic. Tonight we are opening up the archives for a collection of stories about dealing with highly intoxicated subjects. Moments where the tension broke and the job just became downright surreal. It started with a routine dispatch, a report of a male subject who had broken out the windows of his own mobile home. The caller wasn't sure if he was mentally unstable or under the influence of something, but he was tearing the place apart. I arrived on the scene with a local sheriff's deputy. Now, when you roll up on a domestic or property damage call, you're scanning for threats. You're looking for firearms, knives, clubs. What we were not prepared for was the sight that greeted us in that front yard. Sitting right there was a grown white male. He was drenched in sweat, wearing absolutely nothing but a pair of kids' underoos bottoms, and proudly straddling a toddler-sized tricycle. And in his hands, a massive neon-colored Super Soaker squirt gun. As we stepped out of our cruisers, he immediately began yelling at us to leave him alone. I kept my distance and said, "Hey man, we got a call that you're breaking the windows out of your trailer. We just want to make sure your wife and kids are okay inside." He yelled back that it was his trailer. He could burn it down if he wanted to, and that his wife had already taken the kids and left him. Well, we wanted to verify that, but our skepticism only enraged him. As the deputy and I started approaching the mobile home, the subject decided to engage. He leveled the Super Soaker and opened fire. Now, I'd love to tell you that this was just water, but it wasn't. A perfectly aimed, soaking wet swath of whatever liquid chemical cocktail was inside that toy scored a direct hit right across my freshly pressed, shined uniform. And this guy didn't stop. He kept pumping and shooting until the reservoir was completely empty. I wiped my uniform, looked up at him, and said, "Looks like you're out of ammo." His response? He drew back that oversized plastic gun like a baseball bat, preparing to swing on 2 armed officers. At that point, it was on. The deputy and I converged on him like a pair of NFL linebackers. We met at the apex of that tiny tricycle, tackled him off of it, and unseated him right into the grass. But the fight wasn't over. This guy was wiry, slick with sweat, and whatever was in that squirt gun, and operating on pure adrenaline. We finally got the cuffs on him behind his back, but during the walk to the cruiser, he suddenly dropped to the ground. In one fluid, Houdini-like moment, he slipped his legs through his arms, brought the cuffs right out in front of him, nearly escaping them entirely, and just kept walking. After a recuff, we had to carry him chicken wing style to the deputy's cruiser and buckle him securely into the back seat. I gave a sigh of relief, first, that it was in the deputy's back seat, and second, that I thought the hard part was over. I was wrong. Not even a mile down the road toward the jail, I see the deputy's cruiser suddenly swerve off the side of the road. The door flies open. The deputy jumps out, coughing, gagging. I pulled in behind him, turned my blue lights on, and ran up to assist, but I pretty much knew what had happened. I asked him anyway, "What's going on?" The deputy, wiping his eyes, gasps, "Look at that fool. But don't get too close. I had to spray him." He continued wiping his eyes as I walked up to the cruiser and peeked into the back seat. I saw the guy's legs sticking straight up in the air from the floorboard, and his upper body wasn't even visible. I said, "The hell? Where is he?" The deputy pointed to the wire cage right beside the driver's seat. I looked down, and there, poking up through the tiny gap between the bottom of the cage and the transmission hump, was the arrestee's face. He was completely wedged in the floorboard, covered in fresh pepper spray, coughing and spitting everywhere. The deputy explained that almost immediately after pulling away, the guy had somehow slipped his cuffs under his legs again, slithered right out of the seatbelt, and slid face first into the floorboard. The next thing he knew, a face appeared right next to his hip and began spitting and trying to bite him while he was driving. So the deputy blind sprayed a heavy dose of pepper spray right into that corner of the floorboard. Now, legally and professionally, we're required to give aid after deploying chemical spray. The deputy opened his trunk, grabbed a bottle of water, waited for the airborne mist to clear out of the cruiser, then leaned in and proceeded to pour the entire bottle at once directly onto the guy's face, right where it was hopelessly lodged in the transmission hole by the cage. The deputy looked at me and said, "There, he'll be fine until we get to the jail. No use pulling him out of that hole. If we do, he's just going to get loose from that seatbelt again and kick my windows out." Honestly, hard to argue with that logic. I agreed, got back in my pepper spray free cruiser, and followed him for the remaining 5 minutes of the trip. When we carried him into the detention center, the guy started flopping on the floor like a fish out of water. The deputy unclipped his paperwork, took the cuffs off, looked at the correctional officers, and said, "He's all yours. And watch that pepper spray on him. It's mixed in with his sweat and whatever else he's got all over him." The jailers gave us that timeless, exhausted look that every officer knows. The look that says, "Gee, thanks." And right about then, the newest resident of the county jail found his second wind and started screaming again, just as the heavy steel door slammed behind us. Here's the thing about calls like that. On paper, it's assault on an officer, resisting arrest, the whole book. But in reality, you're standing there soaking wet, smelling like somebody's basement science experiment, and you have to decide, do I let this ruin my night, or do I file this under something that I'll probably laugh about later? Looking back, that could have gone sideways fast. A guy that chemically unhinged, holding something that looks like a weapon. I've seen officers make split-second decisions over less, but that night we saw that neon plastic before we saw the threat. Sometimes luck is the best thing that you've got. I can honestly say, I've never looked at a super soaker the same way since. Sometimes the chaos of the late shift doesn't stay in your county. Sometimes it leaks across county lines. Around 2 a.m., I got a call to respond over to my secondary county. There was zero coverage there, and there was no coverage in my county after I went in. This happened a lot back then. Just not enough rubber on the road to cover the map without massive gaps in coverage. The complaint was a red car driving recklessly up and down a rural road, squealing the tires, starting and stopping repeatedly, wiping out mailboxes. The caller mentioned the driver was likely drunk because the house he came from was known for partying at all hours. After a long 45-minute drive, through the winding back roads. I finally hit the area and spotted a red holler rocket matching the description. I fell in behind it, followed it for a bit. It was wandering all over the center line. I flipped my blue lights on, and the driver immediately whipped into the driveway of a single wide trailer. A white male jumped out of the driver's seat and started fast walking up the driveway, up a wheelchair ramp, towards the front door. I exited my cruiser and I yelled, "Stop! State police! I need to see your driver's license. Don't go any further." Well, he ignored me, pulled open the outer storm door, and stepped behind a thick sheet of plexiglass. He looked out at me and shouted through the door that he was inside his house now, so I couldn't arrest him. The mythical base territory rule of drunk driving. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work that way. I said, "I ordered you to stop out here. I can smell the alcohol from this side of the door. It would be in your best interest to open it, or I will open it for you." Instead of complying, the guy literally pressed his face against the plexiglass and made a mocking face at me, then stepped back and slammed the inch-thick trailer door shut and began making faces through the window. Now, I'm a decent-sized guy. At the time, I was probably around 230 pounds, plus another 20 to 25 pounds of duty gear, vest, and boots. I decided to give a firm two-handed chuck to the sides of the door frame, just to make a point and rattle his cage, and show him I was not playing around. His eyes got wide, and then something completely unexpected happened. The entire frame of the door, the whole structure, gave way. The door went flying inward, landing flat on top of the suspect, and I went flying right on top of it. So there I am, riding a mobile home door like a surfboard, staring down through the clear plexiglass and through the window at the guy I'm trying to arrest, who is now pinned beneath it with his face smashed against it. I immediately looked up to see what kind of tactical threat environment I'd just crashed into. And what did I see? An entire family. Grandparents, a teenager, a couple of toddlers, and another random adult, all lined up on a large living room couch, watching some show at 3 in the morning. No one panicked. No one screamed. There was just a dozen pairs of unblinking eyes, it felt like, staring at a 250-pound trooper sitting on their front door in the middle of their living room floor at 3 in the morning. For a few seconds, there was this heavy, awkward silence, broken only by the groans of the relative trapped beneath the door under my weight. Finally, the grandmother on the couch broke the silence. She looked past me at the guy under the door and said in a perfectly calm voice, "I told you was going to get picked up by the law if you didn't keep your ass in this trailer." I cleared my throat and said, "Ma'am, my apologies for the door, but you all saw that he was not complying." Grandma didn't care about the arrest. She just waved her hand and said, "That door's been needed fixing for a long time. You can't light a candle in here what the wind coming around that door won't blow it out." I told the family to stay put, that I'd have them out of their way shortly. I looked down through the glass and told the driver he had exactly one chance to crawl out from under there in the same shape he was in now. He nodded very quickly. I jumped off and flipped the door up off of him, snatched his wrist, rolled him onto his stomach, and cuffed him. I apologized one last time to the 3 a.m. couch crew for the unexpected home remodel, and led him out to the cruiser. Why people want to make things so much harder on themselves than they have to be. That's a mystery that will probably never be solved. At least I had company going back to my county. But every now and then you run into an absolute professional, someone who knows the script, knows they messed up, and appreciates a good piece of police work. Late one night, I got a call about an intoxicated male walking right down the middle of the roadway. The caller already knew who it was, one of our local weekend drunks. I knew him well. We'll call him Ricky. I had arrested or dealt with Ricky on several occasions. To his credit, Ricky never was a fighter. He was always cooperative, always fairly polite. The guy just really loved his beer. I rolled into the area, and sure enough, there was Ricky. He was stumbling right down the double yellow line of the highway, completely oblivious to the headlights approaching behind him. I slowed my cruiser down, pulled up right behind him, and rolled down my window. I leaned out and yelled, "Ricky, jump in the back, the cops are coming!" To my absolute amazement, Ricky didn't look twice. He just reacted. He grabbed the handle, threw the back door open, hopped onto the vinyl seat, and slammed the door shut behind him. A second later, reality set in. He looked up, saw the heavy plastic protective screen, saw the cage, then he saw me, sitting in the driver's seat, looking back at him in the rearview mirror with a massive grin on my face. Ricky slumped back against the seat, let out a deep, defeated sigh, and said, "Oh, man." I looked back at him and said, "Did I lie to you, Ricky?" Ricky paused, thought about it for a second, and muttered, "Well, no, but that was so not cool." Gave Ricky a ride to jail that night. No pepper spray, no broken doors, just a mutual respect for a perfectly executed trick. The gray area of law enforcement isn't always filled with tragedy and trauma. Sometimes it's filled with tricycles, loose doors, and a guy named Ricky who just needed a ride home, even if that home happened to be a cell for the night. Stay safe out there. Watch out for super soakers. This is DK Hall. Thank you for stepping into the gray. I'll see you a little further down the road.